And then Yosibel, it's over to you.
Cool. Are we rolling?
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Thank you for the introduction. And hi to everyone who's joined this webinar. So what I'm going to be talking about today, as Emma has briefly introduced, is how we have created impact online at scale through our civil society initiatives. And how I'm going to look at this is I'm going to tell you a bit about the CABC first. Then I'm going to take you through 3 of our major learnings. And by the end of it, I'm going to open up the floor for Q&A. But if you'd like to, during the chat, I'm not going to, during the presentation, you're welcome to put your messages into the chat window. But yeah, I won't be able to see it until after the presentation. Cool. So with that, let's get into it. So first, I'd like to talk about the origins of the CABC with you. Our founder and executive director, Dr. Kumaran Peter, who's an associate professor at UCT's Graduate School of Business, was among a group of people that noticed around 2016 some very problematic content that was being shared online. He himself, growing up in an activist household who saw his home and community torn apart by the devastating apartheid rule, realized that some of the narratives that were being floated about Jacob Zuma and his corrupt cronies, or stalwart activists like Pravin Gordhan being dragged through the mud, just didn't make sense or stand up to the historical facts. At the same time, globally, the UK was pushing for a departure from the European Union through Brexit. And of course, Agent Orange, or Donald Trump, was using his marketing prowess through social media to exacerbate divisions amongst American society. And all of these events presented a threat to democratic governance, and this brought forth the realization that a civil society response was needed. The challenge from the very beginning was how and what kind of messaging do we take to the public that can hold its own weight alongside private interest media and marketing budgets, which are huge, and that were not only creating, like Bell Pottinger, but also normalizing phrases like white monopoly capital. The public interesting message that the organization sought to focus on when it went live in 2020 was about online mis and disinformation, polarizing rhetoric, and there was also a deep distrust in democratic institutions that was being fueled online and continues to be fueled online, around the media, don't trust the media don't want you to see this, and so on. Government at all levels, business and civil society. So you guys might have seen there's a lot of heat that charitable organizations and nonprofit organizations like the CABC receive online, particularly on Twitter. Due to the scale and proliferation of social media marketing messages, the landscape in which political contestation was taking place had changed. And civil society, we noticed, was struggling to keep pace and hold the peddlers of harmful narratives to account. The premise here is that if social media represents the new public square in a democratic space, there is a complete imbalance if some groups of people are standing on a soapbox with a loudspeaker and amplifying their content while drowning out the voices of the other people who want to and need to be heard. So what exactly does the CABC do? We're a research-centric organization that seeks to counter and disrupt harmful narratives online, not only in politics, but also across a broad range of public interest messaging. And so our core focus areas are on fostering and empowering active citizenry in South Africa. And we're working with Impact Amplifier on a very exciting project at the moment for this. We also look into public health in 2020 when we got started. We covered a lot of work on COVID-19, not only in South Africa, but also in the SADC region as well as in Nigeria. Yeah, we worked on quite a few really interesting projects there. We also have a focus on gender-based violence and tech-facilitated gender-based violence in South Africa, where we focus mostly on male violence, misogyny, and men's mental health. And that falls under the HeKeza initiative or project that we run. And our other advocacy area is on media polarization, where we try to create a more informed citizenry who's able to make decisions that are not being forced on them through propaganda. So how do we achieve all this? We do it through a multidisciplinary approach and a vibrant multi-ethnic team that tries to match the needs of civil society operating in the online space with media and marketing best principles to harness the power of social media in a way that meets the needs of the people and is more than just a place for your next bonus vouchers on Temu. As we've grown over these first 4 years of our existence, we've had to keep pace with the changing social media landscape and the commodification of influence, as our colleagues at Murmur Intelligence have recently reported on. So not only has this meant adapting our methodology to meet the objectives of a growing and learning organization, it has also meant that we have had to learn how to strategically position our content and how we make use of our resources through donor funding to maximize the impact that can be achieved. I want to say off the bat here that impact in our field has been a very difficult term to pin down. If you consider in real life and programs that are run by various civil society organizations, like, for example, job literacy programs, you can track the people who've received your training and then job placements in quite a straightforward way. But it's less linear as we move into new virtual realms where norms and behaviors are being shaped. And so as I work through the learnings that we've had along the years, I will speak to impact in each of these scenarios. And remember, please feel free to put your questions in, because yeah, this is a topic that needs to be discussed a few times, and I'm trying to condense 4 years worth of learning into this 30 to 45 minutes. So we start with research, as this is the starting point for most of our projects, and perhaps the biggest learning that we've had around the approach we take to really expand our understanding and find vectors into the online conversation that could help us expand our impact in the space of public interest messaging. So prior to looking at the data as an opportunity to find vectors into the GBV conversation online, the GBV data sets that were being analyzed were inductive, and the keywords that we used to understand what was being said online was conversation-based. It's going in and scraping Twitter for keywords. Members on the team who had worked on GBV topics in the past had an idea of some of the hot button talking points in South African society, like lobola and blesses. And so the query that was set up included keywords like lobola and blesses. But what happened was that by focusing on these categories and trying to make the content fit into them, we realized that we were losing out on the much larger data set. And this is the case because in 2020, the social media analytics tool that we were using, namely Brandwatch, was new to all of us. And we were plunged right into the deep end with COVID to get started and try and understand this environment, learn the analytics, and produce meaningful content. But so if you look to the on the screen, what you're able to see is part of the query where you have parts of conversation online that were acting as keywords to try and find more conversation. But if you look at the time series analysis graph, the categories blessers, Fathers and Money, Lobola, were actually returning very minimal results within the broad data set. And the purple line, it's purple on my screen, is all the uncategorized mentions. So with this old inductive approach that we were using, where we said, okay, South African public, likely talking about this, going in and trying to understand the topic, we were losing out on analyzing about 70% of the conversation that was actually taking place on Twitter. So without getting into the weeds too much with technical terms, you can think of a query on the social media analytics tool that we use as a sponge, soaking in as much water as it can, except here the water is data points from the news media, from Twitter and Facebook to a smaller extent, and then Reddit and other blogs. Not all these data points are going to be relevant, which is why the data is then added to a dashboard in the same tool, which helps us to dissect the information into chunks that can be interpreted. So where you see the heading dashboard visualization, that's the example of one of the graphs that we're able to see through the tool that we use for analysis. And what this graph is telling us is that when the word men is picked, when the keyword men is picked up at a specific time in our data set, people over that time period as subtopics are mostly talking about money, Black men, police, living. Or if they're talking about girl, it's baby girl, little girl, or white. And then our team of really fantastic researchers goes in day after day and analyzes, they dive deeper by clicking in and trying to make sense of what does all of this data tell us. So understanding that we were only scratching the surface of a much broader conversation with the old approach, this led us to try out a deductive approach whereby broad keywords were used to draw in as much of the conversation as it could possibly bring in. And then for the data to tell us what the thematic areas are. In order to position this, we thought to assess the gender-based violence conversation on social media through the lens of norms and public opinions, analyzing first how people speak in gendered conversations online. So online, and develop sentences that could catch many issues, unlike the conversational keyword approach that was focusing only on a few specific topics and not even the most discussed topics online. So this has allowed us to understand the conversation in a much more nuanced way that highlights some of the systemic issues that sit at the core of gender-based violence in South Africa. So if you're looking on your screen, what you can see is some of the male norms and female norms have been divided into categories like provision and leadership. So when people are talking about what is normal for men on Twitter, we're able to start making these broad vectors of it's about leadership and provision, or it's about social isolation and friendship. When it comes to women, sorry, to female norms, it's domestic roles that are being discussed, or things like purity and humility and other value judgments. This approach has also allowed us to start analyzing queer norms, which would have been very easy to miss if we stuck to the inductive methodology of the old approach. This has allowed us to scale up the analysis tremendously, as we can now talk to broader parts of the public. And for the details of these thematic areas are going to be in our next research report to the EU and the Ford Foundation. And if you would like to receive that report when it goes out, you can email info@cabc.org.za to get onto the mailing list, and you'll receive our latest reports and information. So learning number 2 has been that we're working with, as a new civil society, as a new Section 18A nonprofit organization, we're not working with very big budgets, because we still have to show the donors what it is we're able to do. and do it in a intelligible way that allows them to really understand, okay, we see what you're doing and we can see that there's impact. So to get started, we're operating on much tighter budgets that require careful thought and a big picture strategy. One of the ways that we create impact, which is maybe less known to our donors, is through news media content. This used to take the form of regular content that was losing some of its punch because of the news media overload that we're all facing online. And so we've had to create some real standout pieces that would allow us to see some tangible results. That impact through the news media can have many different forms. Being so immersed in news and social media, there are certain accounts that we monitor for flare-ups and try to intervene with as much information as we can through reliable news sources like the Daily Maverick, News 24, and the City Press to reach a broad audience. So what you're seeing on the screen here is an example of an article that we wrote because while we're tracking conversations related to democracy online, we noticed last year that every time Julius Malema would sing the song that got him kicked out of the ANC, Elon Musk would pick it up and just amplify that they're trying to kill all the whites in South Africa, which we know is completely not true. So what we were able to do was using how these conversation patterns went in conjunction with stats from AfriForum as well as from SAPS, we were able to show that the claims they were making just didn't add up with the figures. So using insights from data analytics on issues that are trending allows us to create media pieces that are used by influencers like Dan Corder, who you also see on the screen, and other public figures, who then promote that content through their own platform because they find value for their audience in our content. And it's really small on the screen. I'm not sure if you can see it, but he generated close to 50,000 views. And that's over and above the traction that we were able to receive through the Daily Maverick, which returned about 44 comments on that particular article. So it opened up a whole dialogue on race in South Africa once that article was put out. The next one is if there's someone posting problematic content online, keep a track of what they're saying and screenshot everything. This particular article that you're seeing was about a far-right commentator in the South African social media political discourse who had posted some outrageous content about race, ethnicity, climate change, of which he seemed to be a denialist. I don't know, he backpedals and backtracks on what he says quite frequently. And some of the other tinfoil conspiracies that we see come out of the US. However, the weekend before, the DA announced that they were making him the chief of staff in the Ministry of Agriculture. He went and deleted as much of his problematic posts as he could in an attempt to whitewash his image. Fortunately, WhatsApp's unroll feature showed the first part of a particularly problematic post that he had made and then deleted. We reached out to him for comment and to him and pretty much everyone in his department. And the very next day, the DA announced that they had asked him to step down. Finally, the most recent piece of impactful news media content was about the most influential Twitter account in the South African political discourse currently, which is known as Chris XL. The account had posted horrendous content that dehumanized foreigners. And when I say foreigners, I refer to Nigerians in particular, as well as our neighbors in Zimbabwe. The account had it dehumanized foreigners, condoned racism, and drove incredibly misogynistic content. Initially, when we saw on their profile that they were advertising a bonus for an online betting platform that was licensed in the Western Cape, we realized that if these guys are doing business with Chris XL, they know who the owner of the account is. And we tried to contact one of the owners to obtain and reveal the identity of the person or people behind the Chris Excel account. But when it became clear that they weren't going to be forthcoming with information, we had to pause and not get caught up in the hype and reflect again on what we could do with our little voices and minimal spend to take on a marketing propaganda machine that had close to 3 million followers. Taking this step back, we realized that what these influencers are most interested in is money. So they're basically able to say whatever is going to ruffle feathers so they can get attention and then maximize their revenue from the traffic that they get. So we pointed out that a prominent betting platform that is licensed by a Western Cape regulator is doing business with an openly xenophobic and misogynistic account. And they appear to have done so without the requisite authorization. And so within hours of this article going live, and I have to say a massive thank you to Janet Hurd from Daily Maverick for helping us to get this article out. Within hours, the promotion on this account was removed from the account's profile. And this created a knock in their revenue generation capability. So it's hitting them where it's going to make the most impact. And so what you can see on your screen is in the profile, you see the bonus advertised first, and then just a few hours after the article went live, the bonus is no longer on the profile. Learning number 3 has come from, this is the third and final learning. And it's about a unit at the CABC that really allows us to differentiate our service from other media and corruption watchdogs out there. And that is dialogue facilitation. However, how we perceive and work with dialogue facilitation in the organization has shifted quite a lot in the last year as we have incorporated more cross-department collaboration. And where we've allowed dialogue facilitators to be dialogue facilitators and content creators to be content creators who are looking for opportunities to create content that the dialogue facilitators can use effectively. Following the methodology shown above, when we reflected on what was taking place with the dialogue facilitators online, we noticed that they were applying what seemed to be a conflict resolution style of entering difficult topics online. So that's making a person feel understood and heard, allowing both parties to express their perspective, reflection, and encouraging critical engagement. Now, you guys would all be familiar with how the news cycles and trends change almost overnight with social media. So trying to follow all these steps in the online environment it requires a lot of time and effort. So the challenges with this approach in a social media environment is that the people that you could be trying to engage with might be a troll, that's a blue face, let's say, or a bot. In these instances, time and resources could be drained trying to reason with one of these characters. The other challenge is that the individual nature of communication means it can take a long time going back and forth with one person on a post. We realized quite quickly in the last year that in order to create impact in this space, we had to move beyond individual conflict resolution and to facilitating a space online where people felt comfortable enough to share their opinions in public. In order to achieve this, we had to turn to media and marketing theory. For example, the uses and gratifications model of social media users presented by Whitting and William in 2013, which you can see on your screen. The idea here was that if we understood the utility that people derive from using social media, we could create content that satisfied some of these that are shown here, such as social interaction, entertainment, expression of opinion, information sharing, as well as a pastime. Shonya, which would mean, and this would mean that people would find utility in the content and be drawn into the conversation. This approach allows the content creation team, who have won multiple awards, including a Lurie for some of the GBV work that we've done, to create high impact content like a YouTube series with comedian Riyad Musa, who discusses everything from democracy to men's mental health using comedy over 4 seasons of content. And that's using comedy on very, very difficult conversation. So I'd like to share a few minutes of a short episode from our best performing season of Under the Microscope. And that's the democracy-based season. And then I'm going to show you how we drove the content via other social media channels like Facebook.
Hello, I'm Dr. Riyad Musa, and welcome to season 2, season 2 of Under the Microscope, the show where we take a closer look at topics affecting South Africans and try to make sense of them. Yo, people, season 2. Actually, that's 4. I mean, 2. Can you believe it? We didn't get cancelled, which is quite easy to do nowadays. Last season, we spoke about issues around the COVID-19 pandemic, and this season, we'll be addressing another pandemic that's threatening the world. Dun, dun, dun. The pandemic of greed and corruption. I had to say corruption in that accent, corruption, which is putting democracy at risk. Yeah, people, there are a lot of scams out there trying to destroy democracy and replace it with what we call a kleptocracy. Remember at school when you call that guy who stole your He-Man doll a klepto? Same principle. The word kleptocracy literally means rule by thieves and describes the specific corruption that occurs when state leaders routinely loot millions or even billions of dollars from the SOEs or national treasuries. But get this, because we in South Africa are a democracy, we get to use democracy to defend the democracy. Mind blown, people. Is your mind blown? Is your mind blown? We're a democracy today because everyday South Africans stood together and stood up against the brutal apartheid regime. They risked their lives so that South Africa could become democratic and we could all have equal rights. These human rights are enshrined in our constitution, which is regarded as one of the most progressive constitutions in the world. So why is our democracy so important? And why? Why? Tell me why should we protect it? Because it gives us freedom, bruh. Freedom of speech, freedom to worship whoever we like, freedom to marry whoever we want, freedom to move, freedom to protest peacefully, and freedom to speak out against corruption. And sometimes democracy does go too far because there's also freedom to wear Crocs. But hey, that's democracy, people. And we should never take these freedoms for granted. If you live in a non-democratic country like Russia or China today, Big Brother will be watching your every move. And you don't want to go into that diary room, believe me. Knock, knock. Who's there? Putin. Putin who? I be putting electrodes on your nipples. And not in a good way. Because there is a good way to do it. Okay, wait, I'm sharing too much. It's fine. It's supposed to be bad. That's a bad thing. It's a bad thing, yeah. Okay, the way we protect our democracy and our basic freedoms is by being active citizens. And that doesn't mean joining Virgin Active and doing 20 star jumps and being an active citizen. No, it means not being passive and sitting on the sidelines with our heads in the sand. As a South African citizen, you have to actively engage with your community, enter the space of political debate, dialogue and action, vote, protest peacefully, sign petitions. You know, Now, hard-earned democracy, people. People in government are there to serve you, bruh. To you. So hold them accountable. It's okay to be like a Karen for your country. Become irritating to the management. Be a Karen.
Cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. The content creation team definitely enjoyed making it. And yeah, this shows you how we can bring light-hearted banter to really pressing, really difficult topics to talk about in such a way that a much broader audience are able to understand and make sense of what's going on out there. So over the period of a year and a bit, creating short form content from the high impact videos that we shared through our Facebook channels, we generated more than 2 million views on the content that we had. So unlike that, I cut it short at about 4 minutes, but that particular video is around 6 minutes. And the rest of the episodes are somewhere in the range of, say, 10 to 15 minutes long. These 16-second videos were shared through Facebook, and then people were coming from Facebook onto YouTube and watching it. And what we found remarkable is that people were then on Facebook coming back after they had watched the content and commenting and adding their voice. And this meant that we had opened up the space for dialogue online by drawing people in through maximizing the use of our creative assets. And what we noticed is that in the comments, normal users who had viewed our content were actively dialoguing with each other. We had people of all races and genders coming and adding their voice and opinions on difficult things like religion and democracy and the Constitution. And that meant that a natural conversation was flowing instead of us trying to shift the direction of online debate and discussion, which is actually healthy. And a hypothesis that we're working on in this regard is that people equipped with information and talking points from a reliable public figure may feel more at ease to dialogue online. So just to come back to the conflict mediation approach, I have to be clear that this style of dialoguing does have a place. And what we're learning is that that place is during in-person training sessions and online webinars, where we try to encourage people to speak and engage critically with the information that they are presented. So in equipping our digital activists, we are giving them the tools and skills to feel confident enough to go onto fraught conversations and send a message, a thoughtful message or two, and we're allowing them to reflect on their own social media experiences. It also creates rooms for individuals to feel heard and comfortable when they speak. And what you're seeing on the screen is some of our incredibly hardworking dialogue facilitators who go on the ground in front of people and have some very pressing and difficult conversations where they've managed to get so many people to open up and share their lived experience, which adds a layer of triangulation to our analytics online, where we can incorporate the human stories and sentiments that we are hearing directly from the dialogue facilitators, who are dealing one-on-one with people, and they know they're dealing with people because it's in person and it's not a bot that they're trying to make sense of what this behavior is about. Yeah, so in fact, a little plug here for an idea of how the in-person dialogue facilitation training works and how it differs from the content consumer-based approach that we're trying to drive large-scale measurable impact. You can join a webinar that we're holding on Wednesday, the 13th of November. I've put the details up here, but you can also find it on our LinkedIn page. So we've covered quite a bit over the last 30 minutes or so, maybe a bit longer. And as a quick recap, I wanted to remind you of our learnings. The first is that a context-based deductive approach can improve our understanding of the data. Impact on a tight budget requires careful thought and a big picture strategy. So not just jumping to reveal information that you think is important, really stopping, reflecting, and considering how you can hit hardest. The third one is that dialogue facilitation online requires more than conflict mediation. It requires creating open spaces where people feel comfortable enough to come and share their voices. We are continually learning and improving, and this is a lot that we've learned in the last 4 years in terms of how we operate and position ourselves within the space. And because of this continual learning and improvement, we gladly invite questions and comments from the general public, the media, and civil society into our methodology and practices, because at the end of the day, sharing with each other and getting this kind of information and being tested on what it is that we're doing and being accountable to all of you is what is going to help us to improve this and create a more stable environment online as best as we can. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I will open the floor for questions and answers.
Thanks so much, Yosabel. Before we get into Q&A, that was a wonderful walk through all your different perspectives and what you've gained, and in fact answered some of my questions as you went as well. So just to, and encouraging to see how you've implemented the data and the different approaches and tested. I think that's a really good message, is that testing and iterating as a generic approach to challenges is often best. I have some questions for myself. Apiwa has a question in the chat. Apiwa, do you want to read it out, or do you want Yosabel and me to read it and then she can answer?
I can do that.
Cool. Okay. Maybe Apiwa is not there anymore. Oh yeah, she is.
Okay, I can see Apiwa's question is, how do you define impact in the context of civil society organizations operating online? What metrics or indicators do you believe are most significant? How can civil society organizations effectively utilize data analytics to inform their strategies and decision-making process? Are there specific tools that you recommend? Cool. So like I said, impact in the space, what we're learning is this, it's not just one thing. So you can't just say that, okay, we're going to pull a list of 10,000 people and we're going to send them a message, and then those people are going to become digital activists. It doesn't work like that. That's not real impact. Impact is when we can see that people are engaging with our content online. So we're spending all of this money on making high impact content that gets people to think and reflect. And if people find utility in it, and that they're coming to our content, they're watching it organically, we've managed to amass more than 25,000 followers on our Facebook CABC social page. That means that those people have an interest in what we're doing, and that is impact as we see it. So those metrics online are based around, for the moment as we understand it, are based on engagement. Another civil society organization that does this really well, and I recommend anybody to go and take a look at online, is Women for Change. Women for Change, you can quite clearly see the organizations that have a strategy versus the ones who are trying some sort of spray and pray, let's do this and see what happens kind of thing. And Women for Change, you can see that they have constant, regular content that goes out that is of interest to the public. They have a brand identity. It's the marriage of media and marketing to tackle a social media problem rather than relying on social working or civil society approaches only. That's why we're multidisciplinary. So I think that should have answered your first two questions. How can civil society organizations effectively utilize data analytics to inform their strategies and decision-making processes? So analysis paralysis with data is a thing. It's best to, you need to understand what it is you're trying to achieve with your content, and then engage the rest of your team, as well as people who can understand stats and data and so on, as well as, like I mentioned, marketing and media practices, to understand where are you going with it. What is it that you want to do? Do you want to have a troll farm worth of people who can go and help to shift sentiment online, which requires huge resources and is a massive promise? Or are you going to try and be strategic and know that, okay, with what little we have, this is what we can achieve that can shake things up the most, and that can disrupt certain things as we know them and disrupt harmful norms that are being formed online. Specific tools, I think what we found really useful, apart from Google Analytics, to be able to check your website. So that was one of the things that allowed us to see that the decks and decks of images that we were creating, there wasn't much traffic going to that to actually make use of those images. Whereas when we were looking at the content that was being pushed out on Facebook and YouTube, there were hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of people who were actually engaging with that content. So use your analytics tools, because they are free to use with your with the different social media profiles to help you understand what the audience is like out there. And from a data analytics perspective, there's two main products that people use. We use Brandwatch, and the barrier with that is cost. It's one of our largest costs to the organization is Brandwatch, but it allows you to go over a longer period and it returns a lot more data points. The other one that people tend to use is Meltwater, and Meltwater is, it's not bad. You can get a lot done, and you can get quite a good understanding from it. But from my recommendation, it would be Brandwatch.
Thanks. I think Apira sent me a WhatsApp to say that her Zoom had frozen, so she wasn't able to reply.
Oh,
but
okay.
Cool. Thanks, Yasabel. I have some follow-up questions, but I don't want to dominate. So does anybody else have a question about the work that CABC does, or any of their approaches and insights that you've learned about today? Please raise your hand, drop a note in the chat, or just jump straight in. Okay, I have a question. So my question, I had a couple of questions. So on a very practical level, you've got your kind of people-centric, civilian-centric approaches, which is to work through various different sort of media to engage directly around the patterns that you're seeing online. In terms of services to civil society, I imagine you would also be able to provide, and I think you do, sort of research reports that kind of feed into how other organizations are surveying a topic, and then whether they're implementing, you know, media or communication strategies or programmatic strategies, because I imagine, you know, all of this mapping of sentiment then applies to how we, you know, engage on the ground as well. How big a piece of your work is that, sort of feeding into other parts of civil society with your unique kind of perspectives and capacities? Actually, let me leave you with that question.
Thank you.
Looks like I'm not going to try and squeeze to it. I do have another one.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
quite a big part of what we do. So, around climate change and the just energy transition, for example, we did quite a lot of analysis between over the last 3 years or so, most recently with the Public Affairs Research Institute. Um, just to understand specifically, so we can go as specific as looking at the province. And we can see not only when people are speaking about Mpumalanga, what are they saying? We can also see the people who are located in Mpumalanga who are communicating on Twitter. What are they saying? So the purpose behind that was for a triangulation to understand these narratives that people are speaking about on the ground in Mpumalanga, where they're coming from. Are they actually coming from Twitter? How much of it is coming from Twitter? And who's driving it? Who's influencing the voice of the president? That was another big question for us on that particular project. We also worked on climate change. Also, we worked with WWF and the Presidential Climate Commission to look at who are the voices that were loudest in the climate change conversation and the just energy transition conversation. And we were able to do a comparison of, say, Crispian Oliver from the PCC and have a look at his Twitter profile and see what he does. And he pushes out some really good content. And he is one of the expert voices that South Africans should be turning to. But instead, they were turning to Professor Tim Noakes, who is a climate change denialist from what we can see.
Oh, interesting.
But yes, it's not only in climate
Yeah.
change. Sorry. We also, as part of our EU, one of our EU deliverables at the end of last year or the beginning of this year, we analyzed the 16 Days of Activism campaign. And we just looked at what civil society organizations were doing on social media for the 16 Days of Activism. And the two guys who are on this call also from the research unit, Hunter Barron and Kyle Janser, did a fantastic job to, in a very gentle way, show people what's working and what isn't and what can be done to pick this up. And what followed from that is we were engaged by a consultancy that was doing work for the government to discuss the 16 Days of Activism and how the campaigning works online, to kind of advise on what can be done to achieve better engagement.
Cool. Sounds amazing. Yeah, and because I think one, you've got this analytical capacity in your teams, but also I think being able to do that like mass surveying through a tool like Brandwatch, most organizations just don't have that capacity. So can I ask my second question, which is a bit harder and a bit more challenging? But so one of the things that we work with a lot in our program and our project is the fact that communication plays a role in kind of opening a mind or opening minds to the possibilities of something being different, but it doesn't necessarily influence behavior. And tracking behavioral change is obviously a longer pipeline and lots of variables. And we have this kind of approach to say either your communication is this centerpiece in attitude change, which you're assuming will lead to some kind of behavioral change, and you need to be able to track what that looks like on the ground for you to really survey if that initial sort of, or all these kind of campaigns that you're running do actually influence change on the ground. And then the other sort of way that we position it with organizations we work with is to say, your communication is the opener, and then the closing on the behavioral change side would be programmatic. So then you would plug into your programs. And I was just curious about, so this idea of online dialogue as being a space of change. And I know you mentioned that obviously you can't necessarily measure change on the ground. You can use those conversations as an indicator of the potential for change. But do you ever then go into the field and test to see what the impact of those conversations have been over time with certain people who've been involved in a conversation? And I imagine it's very hard to do with people who are not part of a database or your community. But how far do you go when you look at the value of that conversation and its iterations over time and its influence on behavior? Or is that something that you feel that the organization feels is just too granular or too difficult to gather? No?
No, not at all. That's a really important next step for us. So in terms of the behavioral change aspect, creating surveys and actually going out into the field, doing the field work and running interviews and speaking to people is an important focus area for us, particularly on like xenophobia and GBV, because we want to understand how much of the conversation that's being normalized online is being taken into the South African public. So that is a very important part for us, but we're still actively working to develop that. What we have done so far to try and understand these kinds of shifts is initially we thought we could enter a conversation and then by benchmarking a query that we could see a sentiment shift between year 1 and year 2. And that was there were many limitations with that line of reasoning, and that being that we're not the only ones that are talking about GBV, and we're not the only ones that are talking about xenophobia. So not only is it impossible to measure, you also just can't, it's a bit tacky to claim credit if there is a change in sentiment in the right direction, because I mean, there's so many people that are working on this. So what we did, and this is all still very exploratory, is working with our developer. We tracked sentiment. We're trying to track sentiment within the comments of the posts that we created. So narrowing it down rather than the broad conversation, can we look at each comment in a thread of a particular post, and can we then say, okay, up until this point or at this point, it was negative, but as there was some sort of intervention from us at this point, then did the conversation go to neutral? Did it become positive? What happened when we tried to intervene? And we've tested 2 sentiment analysis classifying models, and the results have been very varied and quite difficult to pin down. So we are in early stages of doing that, and hopefully over the next years, that's something that we can make sense of.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, I can imagine it's very difficult. And I was just thinking also then one has to make assumptions about that people are the same people on social media as they are in real life, you know? And I can imagine that comes up as something that is, I mean, there'd have to be quite a lot of tracking to say like how much of ourselves.
Yeah, because I mean, it's only 19.
How much do we take? Yeah.
Because we're mostly monitor Twitter, because Twitter's API allows the most information to come back. And we recently started using a new tool that helps us to analyze TikTok and and we've applied for access to Meta's API, which we're hoping to get soon also. And that's going to open up a whole broader segment for us on Facebook. But Twitter represents 19% of your South African population. So it's not that what's said online is reflective of the sentiment in amongst the South African people. What we try to track is based on this researcher, I think he's Canadian, called Ben Nimmo, he's created something called a breakout scale. So what we try to track is how far does information that started, say, in a closed WhatsApp group or information that started on Twitter, how far does it break out? Is it able to take people into the streets so that they're protesting? So when the EFF or, just before the elections, when there were all these things online there's a national shutdown. And I remember shops around here were so scared that there was a national shutdown that they closed for the day and they sent their workers home. They actually lost out on a day of business. And the national shutdown was like 50 people that showed up. So we analyzed the breakout of the messaging, that how far can they get it in reality.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Cool. I like this idea of a breakout scale. Very clever. Yeah, and of course there's different cycles, I imagine, in that breakout scale, right? And there's stuff that happens
Yes.
immediately and then stuff that happens 6 months later or a year later. And cool. I mean, I'd love to get in deeper into the side, and I look forward to other conversations that I can have with you.
Cool.
Again, just to respect the floor. Does anybody else have a question, even if it feels like about your own work, your own relationship to data? I know a lot of you do this kind of work and are kind of digging deeper into, really impactful messaging, especially with communities on the ground, which is often really hard, especially around language of sort of questions of language use as well, just to keep a bit open. And if not, then we can slowly close the session. Anybody? Come on, I bet you there's a burning question.
Thank you, Kim. So we've just popped
Cool.
the
The
mailing list
URL.
link.
Okay. Okay, cool. So that's for your mailing list. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Thank you. And then I dropped the LinkedIn URL as well for anybody
Thank
who
you.
wants to follow. But yeah, if you just Google CABC LinkedIn, you'll get it. Cool. Yes. I mean, that was fantastic. And I think for some people, yeah, maybe the questions will come. If you do have questions and you want to send them through, I'm sure Yasabel will be able to answer, and I'm sure the CABC would love to hear from you. From our side, it's been fascinating, and yeah, I think just kind of really gets into this like philosophical question of what is the relationship between, online media and real change on the ground. So it's something that we're constantly evaluating and interrogating. So it's been wonderful to get your perspectives and to see all your good work. And thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks so
Yeah.
much for giving us this opportunity and this platform to just showcase our learnings. I think the more that what we're really hoping for, well, what we have really been hoping for is this cross collaboration between civil society organizations, just share our knowledge and experiences with each other.
Cool. Yeah. And there's a good segue, kind of synergy with the work that we do and trying to do that too. So I'm really glad we had this opportunity, and I'm sure there will be more. Thanks again, and thanks to the rest of the CABC team for joining us, and thanks to my team. We'll share the recording and some takeouts from the session in an article with everybody afterwards. So yeah, you'll be able to kind of review some of the things, but thanks again.
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks
Bye.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.